There was empires in Africa called Kush, Timbuktu, where every race came to get books. My success to you, even if you wish me the opposite. Sooner or later, we'll all see who the prophet is.
Social boundaries, look at all these broken families, nobody is speaking freely.
Greetings and welcome. We are here at Birmingham University. This is GKTV. I'm Dua Mutev and I'm back with you again here on the UK's #1 conscious platform, GKTV. And we have a esteemed lecturer with us who's going to have a little conversation about what he was talking about, the importance of self-education. We are here at the Malcolm X conference put on by the OBU outfit, and we'll let you know about them a little bit later on as well. But I want to introduce you to Dr. Martin Glynn.
Greetings.
Or Doc Martin, as he asks everybody to call him. I like to.
I prefer it. What happened is, right, when I got the doctorate, the youths on the street, all these young offenders, they threw me a surprise party. And I don't think I'd ever had a party properly in my life. They threw me this party and they said, look, Martin, you're one of us. But they said the word doctor we find too oppressive. Because they said in our lives, when we go to prison, in the streets, the doctor is normally the person that gives you like bad news. So they said, by saying Doc Martin, they feel it's a term. If we give you that term, we feel we're part of your life and you're part of ours.
So it's a term of endearment.
For me, it was purely a term. I mean, they made me a cake, they made me sandwiches, and these are some hardcore youths. But for me, I don't call myself a leader, but I have constituencies. So if I'm giving them advice or guidance or wisdom, I have to listen to what they're saying. And if they're saying, Martin, for us, it's important that you understand this. So if it's about a name change, I don't have a problem. So in a way, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have a PhD, because my whole work in criminal justice has been about giving a platform and a voice to people with no voice.
Having said that, criminal justice, the reason why I stopped you here, I know you could have flowed on. Hold that thought there for me. What I want to ask you is, if you can share a little bit of your background with people about where you're actually coming from, because you did that within the lecture you just given here about self-education, self-identity. Let us know where you're coming from and how you've arrived to this point to be Doc Martin. Sorry, not Dr. Doc Martin.
I'm 58 this year, 3 kids, 5 grandkids, father at 16. Came from a very, very tough background. I was a youth at school, couldn't fight. I couldn't fight. I'm a youth that I would cry. You know, as you roll up your fist to hit me, I'm bawling at the same time. That was me. But my mother, when I was being raised, I told her I couldn't fight. And at school, I used to hear the term, sticks and stones may break my bones, calling never hurt me. But what I realized when my mum taught me sarcasm, when I verbally abused somebody at school, it stuck worse, because when somebody hit me, I could put a plaster or I could do something with it. So I learned I had the gift from about 13 of talking, but I became a clown. So in order to avoid taking responsibility, I'd always try and style things up. But I grew up in a house which had a library. So I was never allowed to watch TV as a child. I mean, from 7 till about 16, I was never really allowed to watch television. But I grew up in a house with about 3,000 books. So the only thing I could only do in the evenings is read. And then plus the fact, because we wasn't allowed to watch TV, my mum had this blue radio. So I actually grew up reading and listening to the radio. And at the time, 40, 50 years ago, the radio was not like it is now. It was like an encyclopedia. So at the age of 11, I don't know if you probably remember this, but when you was at primary school, you had a reading test. And a reading test, they had about 200 words. And if you could read all of them, they assessed your reading age. When I was 7, I had the reading age of a 13-year-old. By the time I was 13, I was a prefect. By the time I was 15, I was head boy. By the time I was 16, I was accomplished as a public speaker. But I was so hungry for knowledge, I went into engineering. Spent a long time, after I got bored of engineering, I became a teacher of design and technology. But when I became a teacher of design and technology, I realized that youths would come to my house. But the youths that would come to my house were ones that got expelled, excluded, girls who got pregnant and said, Martin, can you tell my dad? So I suddenly realized when I was an engineer, that a lot of young people were coming to my house. And because I'd come from the same background, suddenly I realized we had a connection. So my house became like a community center. And then when I was in engineering, I was a very good engineer, but I was more passionate about helping young people. So I just abandoned everything and then went from one thing to another. But ultimately, when I got involved in criminal justice in 1985, I had a national reputation as a spoken word artist. It was Benjamin Zephaniah, Linton Kwesi Johnson. We were part of the dub poetry, British dub poetry movement.
Do you know something? You just said that. I did say to one of my colleagues, I know this cat from somewhere, and I was very much into Linton Kwesi Johnson and the dub poets, and I thought to myself, I know Martin, I know you from somewhere. Your face is very, very familiar.
I was a dub poet in the 80s, and the Broadwater Farm Collective, all the riots that happened, we were the spokespeople. We were the newspaper. We were the talking newspaper.
That's my area. That's where I'm from.
Yeah.
Broadwater Farm, Tottenham, Park Lane.
When Cynthia Jarrett passed. Yeah.
That's where I remember you from.
And I remember being in Hyde Park on the back of a truck in Hyde Park with the Broadwater Farm Massive, and having to perform poetry to stop people rebelling. Well, at that particular moment in time, suddenly I realized that not only did I have a kind of sense of influencing people, but I also realized that artists could raise awareness, but I needed to take it further. So I went to America, came back from America, and a woman gave me, I was out there when I was campaigning against the Ku Klux Klan, and I'm not going to lie, I was one of those activists who, in London, you don't face a gun, so you can get away with screaming and shouting. And I went to America and I was faced with stormtroopers. The woman I worked with was an advisor to the governor of Boston. She gave me 4 addresses of prisoners with long-term sentences. She said, you need to get more involved in prisons. I spent a year looking at these 4 pieces of paper. I selected one, and lo and behold, the person that I picked out was in prison with George Jackson the night he was murdered. And as a consequence of that connection to this prisoner that we're still in touch today, I then started going into prisons because a lot of my friends were locked up. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was a poet, so I would come in there and there'd be 50 men in there, and it felt like going to the 291 Club at the Hackney Empire. But somehow, these guys would stand on their feet.
So this is prisons in the UK, yeah? So we're talking about, I asked you earlier on about off camera, about Winson Green, is it still existing?
Yeah,
and you said it's now, it's HMP Birmingham, yeah? So under private control?
Private control. So over a period of about 30 odd years, I then went to the American prison system and I worked with men in prison. I came back and I was so disillusioned with the state of our men in prison that I didn't know what to do. I was a spoken word artist. I thought I'd taken it as far as I can go. I was a playwright. I'd written for Casualty on BBC One. I was an artist and I was having an impact, but I felt I wasn't making any difference. There's a brethren of mine. He's one of my brethren. We've known each other for 40 years, and he's one of them, man. My best friend is one of the roughest men I know, but he's been there from day one. You know, I don't really have a lot of friends who are kind of gifted and talented in that sense. This is a man that's been there for me from day one. And he said to me, he said, yo, Martin, you've got to become a criminologist. He says, because you've outgrown your position. And I said, brethren, I ain't got no formal qualification. I ain't got no degree. He said, I don't care. You've got to do that. Anyway, my mum died, and she left me some money from the house. There was a guy called Professor David Wilson, who, I was one of those people, I was an angry voice of the black community that sounded intelligent. So I would go on a platform and curse white people out. It just happened there was this one white guy called David Wilson, who is the country's leading criminologist in terms of serial killers and stuff. For 10 years he told me, you need to become a criminologist. I said, I don't like academics, I don't like you. It was constantly like that. I'm an artist. Anyway, my mum died. The community got together and said, look, Martin, I'm broke. I'm still a hustler, I'm a thief, I've come out of prison. You're just a brain. You know, if it's a science fiction scenario, you're not a man that fights people physically, you're just good with your mouth. So we need you to go and get a master's. And I said, brethren, I ain't got a first degree. Go and get a master's. So I ended up phoning this guy that I've cursed out for 10 years, and he run the department in criminology, and I said to him, yo, David, you know. Anyway, needless to say, I came in, I did my master's in 6 months, got a distinction, left it, went to America, came back, had a nervous breakdown. Thought, that's it. They phoned me up and said, do you want to do a PhD? I said, no, I don't want to do a PhD. I don't want to see university again. Because I said, I'm not making no difference. Anyway, my brethren pulls me to one side. He goes, look, be a chess player. I said, what do you mean? He says, think 5 moves down the line. Anyway, somebody said, why don't you apply for a Winston Churchill Fellowship? Now, the Winston Churchill Fellowship is like, for me, it's such a high esteemed thing. But what it was about, you could go to some part of the world and learn something and bring it back to the UK. So I thought, from a leverage point of view, me doing a PhD wasn't enough. Because I knew that when I get in to do a PhD, based on people that I've known from the past, they're going to swallow me up. They're going to make me a lecturer. So I needed a bargaining tool. So I applied for the Winston Churchill Fellowship. And I wanted to go and look at father absence in Baltimore, because I'd watched The Wire. I know about the Crips and the Bloods. And I wanted to experience the extreme end of criminal justice.
So you must have been watching what was taking place in Baltimore at this present time with
The Wire,
a keen
I watched
interest.
Everything.
I mean, the recent uprising in terms of
I mean,
what happened.
3 years ago, I wrote about what happened. I predicted this would happen. So when I phoned up Baltimore to...
You predicted?
Yeah, I predicted it. I wrote about it. Because when I went to Baltimore, I seen the erosion of the infrastructure in Baltimore, because I discovered that, like, in 1 year, like 30% of fathers were taken out of the community. I saw the aggressive policing. Because in East and West, Baltimore's a very segregated city. So the only time you saw a white police unit is in a predominantly black community. And I remember seeing things like black women being arrested by 5 white police officers. And I saw a lot of aggression. But when I met with the Crips and the Bloods, I suddenly started to get a different understanding of gang culture in relationship to a society that's relentless in how it oppresses certain sections of the community. So the interesting thing is, when I did the PhD with the Winston Churchill Fellowship, I included my trip to Baltimore into my PhD, because I knew if my PhD was international in orientation, then academics would have to contest or contend with my status in academia, because I went into therapeutic communities, I went to the community, I went to America. But what I did do, I wasn't content to just go to America. I wanted to be based in the world's leading university. So I negotiated with Johns Hopkins that in the night I'd be on the streets, and by day I'm at Johns Hopkins. So when I came back to England, and I've been to Johns Hopkins, suddenly every academic who's never been to Johns Hopkins, never been to Oxford, never been to Cambridge, in chess it was checkmate. But what I also did, a year before I passed my PhD, I got in touch with Routledge, who's one of the world's leading academic publishers, and sent them my book proposal. And they said, if you pass your PhD, we'll publish your book. The day after I got my PhD, they published my book.
How long did it take you to achieve? Because you said you got your master's in, what, 6 months?
6 months.
So the PhD, how long did it take you to...
I'll give you the raw statistics. 90% of people do a PhD don't really finish. Out of the 10%, about 6 or 7% do it in 5 to 15 years part-time. 3% of us do it in under 3 years. I did it in 2.5 years. I read 500 books, 1,500 articles, wrote 500,000 words in 2.5 years.
Well done. Excellent.
I did. So in a way, but as I said this morning, I trained myself like an athlete. I had 5 supervisors. I told all my friends don't talk to me for 3 years. I physically picked up the phone, they didn't. I was raising my son at the time, so I had a reason to stay indoors. Intellectually, I did what athletes do. I would start very early in the morning, 6 in the morning till 6 at night. Sleep, I changed my sleep pattern. And because of my age, I kind of knew that failure was not an option. And so in a way, and I also took a position as an, I don't like the word academic, but as a critical researcher, which means my research is about political, social, cultural, it was about change. Simple as that. But the beauty about the PhD, when you can justify whatever choices you make in terms of the way you think, you can then abandon it all, because you've got the kind of mindset that says, everything I do, I'm going to provide evidence, but it's going to be different types of evidence. So I'll use everything from smell, sound, music, food as evidence to justify what makes people do some of the things they do.
In your lecture, you explained the importance of self-educating oneself, yeah, and that was essentially the beginning of the journey where you're at now. Yeah, could you expound a little bit on that before we ask somebody? I've got somebody else I know that I got an interview before. In
relationship to self-education, it revolves around self and the things we know to know about self. I've taught myself many different things. Recently, I had a prostate problem, And because I was very frightened to go through the procedure, because all the information on the internet, books, was scaring me. So I had to teach myself, I had to self-educate myself about what a prostate was, what is the right diet for the kind of biology that I have. So I had to really go to town on it, so that when I ended up talking to the NHS and I was talking to nurses, I went in there armed with questions and insights that they weren't really prepared for. So my journey, even though it was physically very painful, but the emotional and psychological impact meant that I was completely in charge of what I was doing. What that did for me in terms of self-education, it kind of taught me something about most of what we are fed is never presented. Nobody really considers somebody who can't read or write, who was autistic, of thinking to say, how do you want this information presented? So what I did is, part of my self-education is, after I'd been through my surgery, I went onto the streets, and what I did is an experiment. I met middle-class men, black and white, and I said, look, I've just had a prostate biopsy. And they did the usual, I'm concerned, and there's a kind of liberal response. When I went back on the road, when it hit the roads, big mans from prison, their curiosity doesn't come out in that way. So what I started to do is use humour, because historically, humour is not just about making things laugh, it's like making it easier to talk and discuss things in a difficult way. So part of my self-education is to, what I learned from this diagnosis and going through the process is, Martin, in the Bible, I'm not a Christian, but in the Bible, there's a lot of, if you look at the story of Job, one of the things that Job said, God, why me? And God said, well, why not you? Some of us feel, because we're educated and because we've got money and because we've got influence, we think that we're immune from poor health.
Well said.
And what I learned from this, and I mean, I'm quite grounded, but the beauty about having a prostate problem is that, why not me? Because I'm 57, I'm aging, my body's breaking down, and if I'd have spent more time in the last 50 odd years understanding me and not responding to everyone else's agenda, I wouldn't have got into that particular situation. So now, my journey of self-education, if you draw a circle and you've got what I am, in the middle is who I am. And I'm kind of about an inch away from who. And so if I'm 58, it's going to take me another 10, 15 years to get to the centre. But the moment I get to the centre, I think I'm going to get a call from God, and I feel that there's a cinema somewhere, and God's going to go, boom, what did you do with the life I gave you? I'm going to be able to say to him, you know something, everybody says, you know, when my life flashed before my eyes, I get 20 seconds. I'm going to have a minute and a half, because I know now, not only am I ready to when I'm going to face God, but I know when God says, what did you do with your life? Not only can I say it, but there'll be a lot of people up there, my mum and other people, that will actually back me up. So for me, what I've learned is to become who I am and go through all of this, is for one simple reason, is that to pass on this legacy, but in a language and a form and a way that makes people who are frightened and scared and angry feel comforted that actually some of us understands it. And now you've got the information, do something with it. So the issue of self-education, I don't know what it's like to die, but I could imagine 1 second before I go, that will be my greatest lesson. Nobody else here is going to know, but that's my greatest lesson. So for me, and I'm saying with guys like yourself, what I would also say about self-education is that if you're given a privileged platform and you've only got 10 or 15 minutes, is learn how to educate yourself about not waffling, going around the houses, trusting the process, as I said this morning. So in some respects, I'm kind of more grateful now that there's people like yourselves, because when I'm dead, this will be preserved. Because back in the day, we didn't preserve a lot of our stuff.
I was just about to ask you, I was going to say to you, if there's anything that you wanted to say to anyone while you are still here, because we're still very grateful to have you here, Doc Mike.
I'm going to spit a quick poem, yeah? But I'm not going to do it in the English way. This is a dub poem, and this is for you, right?
Thank you, sir.
Because I wrote this 30 years ago. For anybody watching who thinks things have changed, I wrote it 30 years ago. I wrote it in 1985. Mr. The Ifield style is the Brixton style, is the Answorth style, is the Moss Side style, where the people are survive and the mind run wild. And Mr. Ghettoology is the name of the game. Psychological destruction, inflict the pain, run down your life and turn you insane, turn you inside out, empty out your brain, Ghettoology style. It'll mash up your head, destroying every cell where the life you live is one pure hell. With its too much noise and nasty smell. With the crime rates high, prostitution as well. Psychological destruction is licking every man, cause the life them live, them no make no plan. So them mind get unbalanced, so them dash them in a van. Go take them into hospital, go give them a brain scan. Psychological destruction. Me say the concrete life is one rat race. Social pay the rent and council get the place. But a little time later, turn in a disgrace, cause every bit of living the hustler them a chase. The black man run the area, I own him corner shop. The man them just hustle to make rent trouble stop, and the woman them a push them pram until them legs one drop. Society's created another human flop. But them no business. Cause once again it's been ignored, me say them push it to one side like a cancer in we body, something to hide. But a little understanding is something to be tried. Cause the people in them area, them still have them pride, and if you face them life easy, you want to go up on them side. And when it gets rough, you see your eye them open wide, because the Highfield style is the Brixton style, the Answorth style, the Moss Side style, the prison style, Baltimore style, Ferguson style. That's what we as ghetto people call simply ghetto style.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin Glynn.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your presence. Keep doing what you're doing, yeah, and you still got a long time.
And you made an
I'm
old
sure.
man feel quite young, so thank you very much to everybody.
Here on the UK's #1 conscious platform, GKTV, and we have a esteemed lecturer with us who's going to have a little conversation about what he was talking about, the importance of self-education. We are here at the Malcolm X conference put on by the OBU outfit, and we'll let you know about them a little bit later on as well. But I want to introduce you to Dr. Martin Glynn.
Greetings.
Or Doc Martin, as he asks everybody to call him. Yeah, I like to.
I prefer. What happened is, right, when I got the doctorate, the youths on the street, all these young offenders, they threw me a surprise party, and I don't think I'd ever had a party properly in my life. They threw me this party and they said, "Look, Martin, you're one of us." But they said the word doctor we find too oppressive. Because they said in our lives when we go to prison, in the streets, the doctor is normally the person that gives you like bad news or... So they said, by saying Doc Martin, they feel it's a term, if we give you that term, we feel we're part of your life and you're part of ours.
So it's a term of endearment.
For me, it was purely a term of, I mean, they made me a cake, they made me sandwiches, and these are some hardcore youths. But for me, I don't call myself a leader, but I have constituencies. So if I'm giving them advice or guidance or wisdom, I have to listen to what they're saying. And if they're saying, Martin, for us, it's important that you understand this. So if it's about a name change, very, very tough background. I was a youth at school, couldn't fight. I couldn't fight. I'm a youth that I would cry. You know, as you roll up your fist to hit me, I'm bawling at the same time. That was me. But my mother, when I was being raised, I told her I couldn't fight. And at school, I used to hear the term, sticks and stones may break my bones, calling never hurt me. But what I realised when my mum taught me sarcasm, when I verbally abused somebody at school, it stuck worse, because when somebody hit me, I could put a plaster or I could do something with it. So I learned I had the gift from about 13 of talking, but I became a clown. So in order to avoid taking responsibility, I'd always try and style things out. But I grew up in a house which had a library. So
There was empires in Africa called Kush, Timbuktu, where every race came to get books. My success to you, even if you wish me the opposite. Sooner or later, we'll all see who the prophet is.
Social boundaries, look at all these broken families. Nobody is speaking freely.
Greetings and welcome. We are here at Birmingham University. This is GKTV. I'm Dua Mutev and Ankh back with you again.
I don't have a problem. So in a way, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have a PhD, because my whole work in criminal justice has been about giving a platform and a voice to people with no voice.
Having said that, criminal justice, the reason why I stopped you here, I know you could have flowed on, hold that thought there for me. What I want to ask you is, if you can share a little bit of your background with people about where you're actually coming from, because you did that within the lecture you just given here about self-education, self-identity. Let us know where you're coming from and how you've arrived to this point to be Dr. Martin, sorry, not Dr. Doc Martin.
I'm 58 this year, 3 kids, 5 grandkids, father at 16. Came from